Well, hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland at COP26. I'm Hugh Stewart and welcome to Scotland at 7 tonight. And for this week and for next week, we'll mainly be featuring what's happening at the COP United Nations conference right here in Glasgow. Tonight's headlines, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres says that either we stop the climate change or it stops us. The COP26 eventually started today after a delay. We'll look at the Glasgow refuse strike. We have a story about the Scottish Green Party and the other UK Green parties meeting in the new Green Hub here in Glasgow. And the First Minister has met young climate activists today at the COP summit. So more of those stories shortly. But first, as usual, we're going to begin with the COVID numbers for Scotland. Today, Scotland reported 2,065 new cases of COVID-19 and 20,414 new tests have been reported. Of these, 10% were positive. No new deaths have been reported in Scotland, although the registry offices are usually closed at the weekend. Yesterday, 68 people were in intensive care and 913 people were in hospital with COVID-19. Altogether, 4,318,783 people have had their first dose of the vaccine, while 3,908,244 have had their second dose. We move on to the Glasgow cleansing staff strike. Yesterday, it was announced that members of the GMB union are continuing their planned strike action in Glasgow. The strike was called off last Friday during negotiations with COSLA, the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities. Glasgow members, however, have reverted to strike action, citing bad faith between union members and the City of Glasgow. COSLA had offered a one-year pay rise of 5.89%, but the union accused Glasgow City Council of failing to give their members proper time and space to consider the offer. At the moment, it's expected that the strike may last for the 2 weeks of the COP conference. Now, I'm going to introduce on sound only. I don't know if we have pictures, but we have our guest tonight, Siobhan Tolland, up there. I hope, can you hear me, Siobhan?
Yeah, surely can. Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry something's gone wrong with the pictures. I'm sure that's not your fault. Right. Have you any? What's the rest of Scotland been saying? As we know, this threatened strike action from a GNB union was, of course, a Scottish-wide issue that was called off last week with negotiations with COSLA. What's gone wrong with Glasgow? Was it something we said?
It's hard to tell at this stage, isn't it? I just hope that there will be a kind of speedy resolution. I think that when a union is saying that trust has broken down, then we do have a kind of an issue, regardless of whose fault that is. I think it's up to the council and to COSLA to make the first step. We are in a position where, and I was on a picket line this morning just for another strike, but a strike through Unite and Unison. But we are in a position where some of our lowest paid workers have risked themselves during the COVID pandemic. For those that had the luxury to work from home, as myself, there were other people that couldn't, and it is the lowest paid workers that have been kind of risking their lives during this pandemic. So there is a lot of issues here, and I think that there's a lot of tension, I think, because I think there is, for all the kind of rhetoric at the start of lockdown, we're all in this together, etc., is kind of a bit clear that we weren't, and it become increasingly clear as the 18 months went on that we weren't all in this together. So I hope that, it is that we're talking about the refuse workers, and these are people that they have absolutely no privilege to work from home. I can work from home, lots of people can work from home, but they have absolutely, the job needs to be done, and it needs to be done with high risk, actually, as well, especially during the global pandemic. So I hope that COSLA and I hope that the council do come to the negotiation table and offer some, or at least try and regain the trust that the GMB seems to feel that's lost. I'm not sure why it's a Glasgow specific thing. I think that maybe tensions are still just a bit high there. But I'm not sure, to be perfectly honest with you. But I'm glad that there's a resolution Scotland wide. I think we just need to resolve this and hopefully move forward from it. It's not a bad
Mhm.
deal in terms of the Scottish wide deal. It's not bad. It's certainly more than I think that what Westminster would ever give. But we do need to kind of find ways forward here.
Well, we hope so. Yes, I think most people listening would agree with your sentiment that yeah, these guys, these people are out doing essential work. And one thing we've all been made aware of in the last year and a half is the difference between people doing fairly unimportant jobs and people like me, like people in the media, for example, or people who really are doing things which are a matter of life and death. And
Yeah.
you know, we have to keep our streets clean. We have to take our refuse away. And as you say, there is no alternative but going out and doing the physical job. Yes, I also, like you, have had the opportunity to stay at home and work on Zoom. So 5.89% seems to be a reasonable settlement, but that's not really what they're complaining about. So yes, as you say, let's hope that because the key issue of wages and the wage rise isn't actually the matter of contention. So let's hope that the two sides can get this resolved fairly quickly.
Mm.
So we'll just see. Again, we'll report on that throughout the week as we hear of developments. Now, next story I'm going to move on to. We're mainly going to be talking about things related to the COP during this week, actually. Plus, we'll cover any other news that comes up. But most of the news we've seen today is about the United Nations conference, which of course is here in Glasgow. First point I've mentioned earlier on is that the UK Green parties have all come together again. Today, the Scottish Green Party, the Northern Irish Greens, and the Green Party of England and Wales were all in Glasgow, and they've opened their Green Hub. I heard earlier on that Caroline Lucas MP was on the train up to Glasgow. She said, incidentally, that she could have gone here for about a third of the price if she'd taken the plane. But that just shows you how daft uh, the incentives and the prices are between flying. However, she spent the money and took the train up. So I think she's here now. So the three Green parties are all together, at least for a duration of the COP conference in Glasgow with the Green Hub. And I'm told that I think Siobhan should now be on screen. I hope so. Right. Here you are, Siobhan. It's
Here
good to
I
see you.
am.
Right. Yeah. Aye, right, sound and vision. So, Siobhan, the next story is about the Green parties, all three Green parties. Now, I'll just quote what Patrick Harvey said to highlight this story. Um,
Mm.
they're not very impressed by the Conservatives' position as we start the COP summit. Patrick Harvey, co-leader of the Scottish Greens, pointed out today that Conservatives are increasingly marginalised in the Scottish Parliament on the future of oil, gas, and aviation. They cut, of course, aviation duty last week in Westminster. Said Patrick Harvey, the Tories have no sense of credibility, no sense of taking the issue seriously. He means the climate issue. And again, reiterating that, Caroline Lucas, MP, called last week's budget a climate-free zone, she said. What we as the Greens are demanding of our own government, first of all, they should walk the talk. It's the first rule of diplomacy. Arriving at a G8 summit full of bluster about this being the last chance, while at the same time pursuing policies at home which accelerate climate change, is unlikely to persuade anyone. Yes, so Siobhan, do you think that the Prime Minister is in persuasive mood? We're going to quote later on what Prime Minister Johnson had to say as he opened the COP conference today. So is he walking the walk and talking the talk?
I'm a wee bit Greta Thunberg here, but I don't think anybody's really walking the walk at this particular moment in time. We've got to cut emissions by half within the next 10 years if we're going to kind of have any chance of reducing the temperature. But actually, the latest study has shown that we've increased our emissions by 16%. That's across the globe. So actually, instead of going down, we're actually going further above. This is a kind of it feels very much like a make or break situation, and the UK, as well as every other country in the world, has to kind of sit up and take this seriously, and there has to be a completely radical rethink culturally, politically and socially about how we move forward. I think the discussions, the cultural discussions as well as the political discussions, are going to be about, what our country's emissions are, what's how are we reducing the temperature now. These are going to be the ordinary everyday discussions that we have. I was driving to work this morning, and there was a kind of the wee billboard with a newspaper, and it was like, we have 27 days to save the planet, and it felt very apocalyptic actually. But there are serious issues on board. I mean, I think it's Patrick Harvey's right in the sense that the Conservatives in Scotland are very much marginalised. Their political and economic position feels completely antiquated now, and I don't think that's just within the Scottish Parliament. I think that's if you look at their political line in comparison to even the United Nations speech and the IPPR report, of basically saying we are in code red, folks. Let's get moving. Let's actually start kind of that transition away from fossil fuels, and then you've got this Conservative line that feels very narrow, very thin on the ground, but very much still in that old economic model but we must just keep continuing for economic activity. And they use, jobs as a kind of flimsy excuse. But we know from the Conservatives' history that they don't care about jobs in any kind of fuel transition, because we just need to look at the 80s and the removal, the transition from coal to understand that they do that. And this is the kind of complex issues I think that we've got. They are marginalised, but they're marginalised, I think, now across the globe, and they will, unless they change, they will become increasingly marginalised, not just within the Scottish Parliament, but I think across the range of politics. Because if they don't change, especially in Scotland, and it's not just on ecological issues, I think, for the Conservatives. I think in almost every single element, they're kind of, they're kind of outliers in the Scottish political landscape. But if they don't make the changes, then they're unlikely to survive, I think, in Scotland as a political party.
Well, of course, the odd position we're in Scotland, of course, is that we have to follow the policies dictated by Boris Johnson in London, but in fact the Scottish Government has a different set of priorities. Now, I think that from what you said, there is of course a big choice to be made, the choice which all countries are going to have to make, of when exactly are we going to make that transition. As we'll discuss later on when we look at what's been said at COP, a lot of deadlines are available. Are we going to transition by 2035 or by 2050, 2060, 2070? Might be too late for that last one. So we're kind of bouncing between, as Boris Johnson did today, between optimism and pessimism, been saying, on the one hand, saying we're at 1 minute to midnight. That's what, as I'm going back to Caroline Lucas, for the Green Party of England and Wales, she said to say, I'm pleased that Boris Johnson does think it's 1 minute to midnight, quite right. But that's less than compelling for a Prime Minister who himself is promoting the Campbell oil field off Shetland. It may be 1 minute to midnight, but it feels like our Prime Minister has the snooze button on. Now, that reiterates what Scottish Secretary Alistair forgotten the chap's name for a minute. Anyway, the MP for Dumfries, Alistair Jack, isn't, of course, a Scottish political figure. He is the MP for Dumfries. He's not the Prime Minister of Scotland, but nonetheless, he said yesterday on the Andrew Marr show that we are 100% committed to oil. The same party as the Prime Minister, who has just said that it's 1 minute to midnight. So obviously, Alistair Jack's clock is set at a different time to everyone else's. But that's the whole dilemma, particularly in Scotland. The oil-rich Scotland, right? We ourselves are confronted with that same dilemma. So when are we going to transition away from oil to gas, and how are we going oil and gas to is it to hydrogen or whatever comes up next?
I think it's
go ahead.
Sorry,
please.
it was no. I think it's the deep philosophical question of the time, isn't it, for Scotland as an oil-rich country? And even if you look back to the last referendum, and independence referendum 2014, we kind of still talked about oil as a rich natural resource, but we can't do that anymore. We just can't, economically as well as morally, politically as well. But the transition has to be, and I know it sounds a bit cliched now, but it does have to be a just transition. We can't can't transition by leaving more vulnerable at the wayside again. So we have to make sure that it's in people's interest that we do transfer over. It is an incredible, I think we're only beginning to realise how enormously difficult this task is. If we think of the difficulty of COVID, then we probably need to times that by 100 and then begin to recognise that the sacrifices that we'll have to make individually as well as collectively and internationally, these are massive, massive decisions and massive masses. And it's all about balance of risk now. How do we risk, the well-being of our people against the well-being of our planet? And these are big, deep-seated issues that we really, really can't run away from anymore. I know that Boris Johnson is kind of fond of his film references, but we are kind of plunging into a kind of an Armageddon, it feels like, and we have some people making very stupid leading decisions. The minute to midnight. I mean, Boris Johnson can say a minute to midnight, but the problem with Boris Johnson is, and I think we recognise this more here in Scotland, is whether he cares we're a minute to midnight. And that's the issue for me, is he seems so reckless and so intent on self-harm that I'm not even sure he cares.
Well, we will come back to some of the Prime Minister's actual statements later on in this session, just in a few minutes. So we're going to look at what was said when the COP conference finally started earlier on today. Just before we do that, the next story we were going to discuss very briefly now is that the First Minister has today met some young activists. The First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, today met with Vanessa Nakate and Greta Thunberg as the world leaders arrived for COP26. During the 2-week conference, the First Minister will engage regularly with Vanessa, who's from Uganda and who took part in today's Global Climate Assembly, which is in the Green Zone. Now, that's the part of the conference which is open to the public over at the Govan side of the river. The First Minister said, Vanessa, Greta and I discussed the importance of world leaders delivering on commitments that will keep limiting global warming to 1.5 centigrade, and the need for the long-promised $100 billion of climate finance, not just to be delivered, but to be delivered to the communities that need it most. Listening, learning, and having open conversations is essential to making progress. They rightly challenged me on where Scotland could do more and how we could influence world leaders. I look forward to spending further time with Vanessa throughout the summit. So there were a couple of points made there. If you meet with Greta Thunberg and Vanessa, you're not going to be showered with praise. They're going to be pretty critical, aren't they? And so they should be.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and fair dues to Nicola Sturgeon, because I think she recognises that a confident First Minister and a confident government allows itself to be questioned continuously, and I think that people like Greta Thunberg, that is their role now. Their role is to constantly push. This is why I like the Greens' influence on the SNP, because I think it always pushes them into a position that's just slightly out of their comfort zone, perhaps as a kind of left of centre social democratic party. But there has to be these pushes. There absolutely has to be now. And I know that there was a lot of controversy over Greta Thunberg saying, Scotland's not a world leader. It's not quite what she said. She basically said that no government or no country is doing the best that they can. But as long as we have that pressure, and it's a pressure from the youngsters who have to inherit this mess, it's as long as we have that pressure, then we are forced into being bolder, being braver, and taking the difficult decisions that now need to be made. So good on Greta Thunberg, etc. Sorry, I can't remember the other woman's name, that's terrible. But good on them for challenging Nicola Sturgeon, because I think that we do need to be challenged across the board on this. If we can't challenge now at a COP26 conference, then there is no point. So yes, I was just coming from a meeting where the leader of Dundee City Council said exactly the same thing. Good on people for challenging us. That's a confident leadership, I think, that you can allow that, because critique is correct and it's the right way to go.
Yes, of course, and it's a conference. That doesn't mean just listening to the leader. It means discussing, and it means negotiating. Yeah. So we don't know at the start of this conference what the outcome of those negotiations is going to be, but there is going to be a lot of tough talking, and I'm sure behind the scenes there'll be a lot of a lot of very hard negotiating. By the way, it was Vanessa Nakati who's from Uganda. Now,
Sorry.
in fact, I have been speaking to a water-based charity in Uganda, and we might have somebody on from them next week. So we'll probably be hearing more from Vanessa if it looks like she's going to be here for the COP. I don't know if Greta Thunberg is going to spend the whole time here, but she's certainly here today. Now, incidentally, talking about young activism, we are expecting to see, of course, a lot of environmental activism right here in Scotland. And in fact, we've seen some of that already in Glasgow. There's also events taking place in other cities in Scotland. Walking to our studios today, I came across several groups of people handing out leaflets. Extinction Rebellion had a couple of dozen people behind a banner up at the top of Buchanan Street. Several other people were setting up stalls. Not too busy yet. We did have one of our reporters out into George Square today to speak to a couple of activists, and I think we'll be hearing from them later on. We've got some footage. We're going to be doing more of that throughout the week. We'll be sending our reporters out to Glasgow to speak to some of the thousands of people who have come in the periphery of the conference. Right, I don't know how many of the people in the conference will get out to speak to us. Susan Aitken of the Glasgow City Council did actually address the conference yesterday, and among other things she said to delegates, why don't you get out of the blue zone and go and speak to some Glasgow people? So I hope they do that, and well, we'll see if we can bump into some of them during the week with our mobile teams. Okay, so we'll excuse me, we'll have some footage later on from George Square today. Now let's turn, Siobhan, to some of the speeches which were actually made this morning in Glasgow as the COP begins. Now, out of solidarity to the poor journalists who were standing outside in a brisk breeze today down by the Clyde, first of all, it wasn't very well organised to start. It was very late getting in. Now, I'm just quoting from the Guardian's reporter there. Fiona Harvey of The Guardian was one of those who was standing outside. At least it wasn't raining, she said. And it took a long time to get everybody in. The conference was supposed to start at 12. It took a long time to get everybody in. Scenes like this have not been seen at a COP since the poorly prepared Copenhagen conference of 2009. A crowd of many hundreds, probably at least 2,000 just in the forward bit, gathered at the entrance where there seemed to be no preparation, no attempt to encourage people to queue rather than simply press forward, no pretense at social distancing. It is inexplicable that the hosts have not managed this better, having had nearly 2 years to prepare. They knew 30,000 people would come. Not an auspicious start to the joint UK-Italian conference. So that was Fiona Harvey of The Guardian saying the hosts have not managed this better. So I think we should just remind ourselves who the hosts are. The hosts are the UK and Italy. And of course, the whole of the Blue Zone is now United Nations territory, policed by CIA and goodness knows how many other people. So it's not really up to the Scottish Government or the City of Glasgow, as far as I know, to organise the queues. I think somebody else had the job of doing that.
I mean, I think to be honest, in the scheme of things, it's. I mean, you know, a lot about queuing is the least of our concerns, isn't it? You know, I mean, it feels a wee bit of a distraction, that news item, and I do like that, you know, that Guardian journalist, but I just felt that it was a bit like, well, yeah, that's fine, okay, there's queues, but can we actually just get to the point now, and can we actually start taking some actions to get this to get these very, very, very important issues sorted, because we are running out of time. So for me, yeah, a bit of queuing is the least of our concerns, to be perfectly honest.
Okay, fair enough.
You know, it's
fair enough, Siobhan.
Yeah, not inside with a bit of queuing.
Okay, I'll move on then. Yeah, okay. When we finally began to the tuneful sound of the Scottish small pipes, so according to my clock, 2.5 hours late, we had. It says the conference was supposed to start at 12 p.m. So I can tell you, according to my watch, it was about 2:31 when Breeze Campbell from Sky came on and played 2 reels on the Scottish small pipes, and so the conference officially started. And she was followed by Boris Johnson bounding to the stage. Now, he talked about the clock is ticking, and you mentioned earlier on, Siobhan, about he likes his movies. He started off with the James Bond reference, saying how our Scottish hero is often up against the clock, often trying to defuse the bomb with just a few seconds to go. Can we stop the doomsday device? The Prime Minister asked. He talked then about the continuing rise in CO2 emissions and world temperatures, and explained about the consequent environmental and climate damage which comes with each increase in temperature. Again, he said, it's 1 minute to midnight. The longer we fail to ask, the worse it gets, and the higher the price we pay when we are forced to act. It's not above a reference and a quotation. The Prime Minister went on to quote Greta Thunberg from a couple of weeks ago with the blah, blah, blah. He said, is that all this is? He then switched to more optimistic mode, saying, we can do it. We can phase out internal combustion cars, he said. In fact, the UK is going to do so by 2030. Glasgow is the very place, he went on, where the doomsday machine began to tick. In this city, 200 years ago, James Watt perfected the steam engine, unleashing without knowing it the crisis we now face. However, finishing on a positive note, the Prime Minister ended with, good luck to all of us. So I think that was another reference. So that sounds like Blackadder to me, just before they went over the top. So I don't know if that's a cheerful reference or not. But again, I think, Siobhan, the Prime Minister was, on the one hand, being optimistic, and on the other hand, saying, this is really serious, we've got to do something, right? So I'm going to come to that later on, because I think Antonio Guterres said the same sort of thing, said, this is really crucial, we've got to concentrate, the time is now. But then again saying, yes, but we have the methods available to tackle this problem. Do you see that yourself? Do you see that we're looking at the two sides of this problem? We're saying this is immense, this is urgent, we need to deal with it now. But on the other hand, we are the people who can solve this problem.
Coming from Boris Johnson, absolutely not. I have never seen an example where Boris Johnson has successfully managed to resolve an issue to the benefit of the people. Or the planet. It's been to the benefit of multinationals and businesses and tax breaks and companies like Amazon. These are economic decisions. These are basically prioritising multinational, international, global corporations against the needs of the people and against the needs of the planet. So this kind of, oh, it's really bad, but never mind, we can sort it. It's very movie-esque in its presentation, and I think that the UK government reenacted a movie as they were dealing with COVID as well, waiting for the kind of final saviour in terms of the vaccine to come and save them. And I think that the narrative has been played out here. It's almost like we're waiting for a godlike end, dramatic end to come and save us at the end, and we can all just sit back and wait for that to happen, but keep continuing that political and economic structure that we do. We will never solve this crisis if we continue to basically promote unhindered global corporations and give them tax breaks. It's just not going to happen. And I'm going to quote Professor Miles Allen here from the Oxford Net Zero Initiative, because he picks up on Boris Johnson's speech, and he says, Boris Johnson has compared COP26 to a James Bond scenario. Well, if I were an oil and gas industry, I'd be stroking my cat at how well this is all going. You can smell the red herrings from Oxford. Everybody is taking the opportunity to talk about everything except for the main point. And the main point is we need to stop fossil fuels. That's the oil and gas industry, as well as food and agriculture as well. These things need to occur. But if we have a government and if we have an economic structure that privileges those organisations, that doesn't hold them to account, then how do we resolve these issues? This is just empty talk again. I'm beginning to feel, stressed and anxious like Greta Thunberg. It's all just, what was it she said today? They're all just fooling you. They're all just creating stories for you inside those buildings. But I do think that Boris Johnson, I don't trust the planet in his hands, and I don't think many people would.
And yet Johnson, as the joint leader of the COP, is in fact, along with Italy, one of the persons charged with delivering a successful conference. However, we were talking about this theme of can we do it? Now, shortly after Boris Johnson spoke, the United Nations Secretary General today, Antonio Guterres, came to the platform. He pointed out it's now 6 years since the Paris COP, and he said those 6 years have been the 6 hottest on record. Either we stop it or it stops us. Enough. We are digging our own graves. The Secretary General saw no reason for optimism, and in fact, I don't know whether deliberately or not, but coming straight after Johnson, he said, we are still careering towards a climate catastrophe. We are still heading for climate disaster. Failure is not an option. Failure is a death sentence. However, the Secretary General went on to add that we can make a sustainable economy, and that can make its own positive feedback loops. And indeed, that's a point which was also taken up by David Attenborough, who came to the stage shortly after the Secretary General. Attenborough said, we need a new industrial revolution powered by sustainable innovation, including taking carbon out of the air. This could provide a clean new world, he said, and we can use nature as our ally. Is this how it is doomed to end, he asks, questioning whether humanity's downfall will be our short-sightedness. But he says, there's still a chance to turn tragedy into triumph. We are, after all, the greatest problem solvers ever to have existed on Earth. Mr. Attenborough summarised the climate crisis which humans ourselves have created with one number, 418. That is a concentration in parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere, which began to increase from the Industrial Revolution. I'll come back to you in a second, Siobhan. I'll just continue on what, summarising what was said earlier on at the conference. Shortly afterwards, Mia Mottley, the Prime Minister of Barbados, took to the stage, and she spoke with passion. She finished by saying, our world, my friend, stands at a fork in the road. When the United Nations was formed, many countries represented at COP26 did not exist. But we want to still exist in 100 years. 2 degrees centigrade is a death sentence for many of those nations. The leaders of today, not 2030, not 2050, must make this choice. It's in our hands. Our people and our planet need it more than ever. Okay, clear words there from the Secretary General and among others from the Prime Minister of Barbados and many other countries. If we wait to 2050, 2060, 2070, I mentioned 2070 because later on Narendra Modi committed India to carbon neutrality to 2070. I think citizens of Barbados, the Marshall Islands, and Turks and Caicos, various other countries in the Pacific are not going to be impressed. By 2070, their countries won't be there. Okay, so it's all about, once again, moving from optimism back to pessimism. What's your opinion, Siobhan, about... Well, I've heard your opinion on Boris Johnson's ability to lead us to salvation. What about technology? Can we build ourselves out of this crisis?
We could, yeah. I think that's what really is one of the key factors, isn't it? Because we're still going to need energy. It's just whether that energy is renewable, and the faster we can transition and the faster we can get technology that would allow the successful kind of running of the planet on renewable energy, the faster we can move away from fossil fuels, which is exactly what we need to do. On the issue of the 2070, the carbon dioxide lasts in the atmosphere for about 100 years and it's cumulative. That's why the next decade is so important, because we could be cutting, but because it's so cumulative, it could end up doesn't matter what we do, so there is an urgency here. 2070 is far too late because it allows kind of so much there. But yes, I think technology needs to, but it's not just technology, it's the investment in technology, and it cannot be left in the hands of, I think, private companies, because there needs to be a much more strategic, a much more planned strategy across the board, not just nationally but internationally. We have to seriously think about investing in technology as fastly as we can in order to kind of successfully make that transition as fast as we can. And I've said this before, we need to cut our emissions by 50%, by half over the next 10 years if we are to reduce the temperature rise to 1.5%. If we move over 2%, then it is absolutely disastrous. We have to cut our emissions by half over the next decade. That is how potent it is. That's technology, but it's technology with a massive international will and a massive international financial backing and planning by governments as well. This is my pessimism. We have to do this. This is what it is. I'm going to move in optimism, and I'm going to quote Greta Thunberg, however, who was interviewed on Andrew Marr on Sunday, and I think that often she can be very pessimistic, but actually I thought what she said brought quite a lot of optimism. And what she said was, if we fail, then we get up the next day and we start again. You know, if we don't make it to 1.5 temperature reduction, then we try to get to 1.6. We keep going, no matter what the odds. We just keep going, no matter where we think. There will never be a point, she said, where we have to throw our hands up and say, right, that's it, we failed. We just keep going. So it's a bit like, on a personal level, it's a bit like trying to give up cigarettes or something that, you can have a sneaky cigarette, but the next day you've got to get back into it and keep at that. And I think that it's that kind of commitment that we now need. It's like, we're not going to be perfect in this. We're not. But we need to keep trying, and we need to keep getting back up again and trying.
Well, I think one of the things that will become clear through the week is that there seems to be a tension in this conference itself between, on the one hand, going for big tech, big industry, which is going to produce the machines that are going to suck the CO2 out of the air, and on the other hand, the whole business of pressure from below, pressure from the youth movements that the First Minister spoke of earlier on. I think it's quite quiet so far in Glasgow, walking around before we came here. Yeah, one or two people are beginning to gather, but I think we're going to probably see a great deal more protest and public demonstrations. Certainly there's a lot planned for the first weekend of the conference. I wonder if we have that footage from our reporter in Glasgow today. But many people have been coming to Glasgow, and indeed to make the point about reducing our carbon. I noticed on the telly yesterday some people had actually walked here. Did you notice, Siobhan? There was a guy who walked here from Sweden. I think he must have taken a ferry at some point. And we also met somebody today who had cycled here. She had an English accent, so I'm assuming she cycled here from England. I don't know, she might have cycled here from Cathcart, I don't know. But a lot of people are making their way here, and some people are making the point that they're using green transport modes. In fact, one of my team here actually saw people with an old gypsy caravan and a horse. So green modes are definitely on the way to Glasgow. Have we got that footage yet? Let me ask Brian in the control room if that video is available. We might. Let's see this. So this week we are sending our reporters out to Glasgow to see if we can meet some of the many thousands, tens of thousands of people who are coming here from all over the place. So Dom McColgan was out today with the camera, and he met a couple of people in George Square. Is that ready now?
Okay, my name is Dr. Leslie Morrison. I'm a retired GP. I'm a member of MedAct, which is an organisation of health professionals working for health, social and climate justice. We're here today on having a climate clinic, encouraging people to see that the climate crisis is a health crisis and to suggest some actions which they can take. Not so much individual actions, although they of course are important in terms of recycling and reducing use of fossil fuels, home installation, eating local food, but more in terms of engaging our political representatives to take brave, immediate decisions towards a just transition to a low fossil fuel economy.
Many of us have cycled to Glasgow to try and raise awareness of the impacts of air pollution on child health. Already thousands of people across the world are impacted by air pollution. It contributes to respiratory disease, to cardiovascular disease, and we're seeing mental health problems as a result of flooding, which will only increase in the UK. So we're really asking climate change negotiations to centre health. We want world leaders to come to binding targets to reduce carbon emissions and to protect people and to protect society. So we're calling it a healthy prescription for the climate, and we encourage you to contact your MPs. We've been handing out postcards to people to send to their MPs, and we're really trying to strongly send the message that the World Health Organization has already been putting forward, that we must have strong action on climate change to protect human health.
That's a couple of people that Dom McColgan met today when he went out with the camera down to George Square. So that was Dr. Leslie Morrison. I didn't get the name of her colleague, but they're representing MedAct. So they're talking about the links between pollution and health. Of course, it's not just CO2 pollution, but also, I think it's really smoke and particulates. So a lot of the problem with air pollution comes from diesels, in fact. It's air quality, really, is what they're discussing. So the point she made there was that was the person who came here by bike. We didn't ask her where from. But they're talking about prescription for a planet, a prescription for a healthy planet. That's a campaign for MedAct. So that's one of the things we will be seeing during COP, is linking different issues. As I said, linking water aid to climate. That's something that we'll be discussing next week, if we can get hold of somebody from a Ugandan charity. And there's all sorts of links, of course, between climate destruction and poor health outcomes. So this all comes into the justice agenda. So the Green Party and the activists in general are always saying it's about climate and it's about justice and it's about activism on the part of the people who are affected. So as you said, Siobhan, it's not about leaving it to the chief executives of a couple of corporations. It's about people themselves taking action, and people perhaps like Dr. Morrison, who've got a bit of time available, actually going out in the streets and putting their energy into the campaign. So are you a supporter of activism, of people getting out and making their voices heard?
Of course, I just want to pick up on the health point that, statistically speaking, we have about 1 billion children, which is like nearly half of the world's children, that live in areas that are classified as extremely high risk in terms of the climate crisis, and that does include pollution, but it also includes more susceptibility to toxins, more anxieties, lots more issues. So this is a big children's issue as well. They bear the weight, but they are much more at risk of the climate changes that are about to occur. There's something like a third of the world's children that actually live in countries where there's 5 separate risk factors based on climate crisis. That's flooding, that's droughts, whatever, as well as the toxins that you were talking about as well. So if we're talking about health, children's health is particularly at risk here. To go back to the grassroots, I think we're going to have to see that, sociologically speaking, as just something that we're going to see increasingly over as the next kind of decade happens. I think that COP26 is a perfect opportunity for people to raise their voices and push those in government and hold multinationals to account on these issues. But I think that if we look at what happened in London just a few months ago with the Extinction Rebellion and the stopping of the traffic and stuff, and I make no moral judgment on that. I know that there was kind of some issues about inconvenience and stuff, but I think they're just going to become a reality of life as the tension builds between the severity and the reality and the increasing need to make the changes that we're going to have to, then I think we're going to see more and more grassroots and on the street kind of pushes towards that. That can't be a bad thing. I think we all need to be pushed.
Well, again, as as the conference develops, we are definitely going to see the opportunity for more of the marginalised groups, if you like, who have a voice. Lots of people from small islands, small countries, people from disadvantaged people from certain countries have made their way to Glasgow, and they do have a forum either in the blue zone or over in the public green zone. So there will be loads of events happening, and we'll do our best to keep up and report on them all. So those are themes that we're going to return to throughout the week as a conference moves on. themes of what can we do, what is the deadline, can we move to transitional technologies, how quickly can we do that, can we move away from coal, oil and gas, and again, how quickly are we going to do that? I noticed today on the live stream from COP, when Antonio Guterres talked about nations having to move away from coal, I noticed that the camera immediately switched to the Prime Minister of Australia, Scott Morrison, because they have a lot of coal and they have no intention of not using it anytime soon. So that's another one of those dilemmas that we'll see. But at the same time, a lot of their coal is being sent to China. Australia, of course, also has massive potential for solar power, and they are using it. The same applies to China. They use a lot of coal, but they also make more solar energy than just about anybody else. In fact, it's China who makes the solar panels. So these dilemmas, these debates are going to be coming up all the time. I'm just going to finish shortly on having a look at the timetable, the agenda for COP26, Siobhan. So let's talk about money. So tomorrow, it's all about, no, sorry, money comes up later. Sorry, it's forests. So tomorrow, the World Leaders Summit will focus on forests and land use, and will convene ambitious governments, companies, financial actors and non-state leaders to raise the ambition on forest and land use, encouraging, of course, not only to keep trees, which themselves embody carbon, but also to encourage the biodiversity, which coexists along with the tree biosystems. Incidentally, I noticed the other day, Lord Deben, who was John Gummer, was on the telly yesterday, and he was told that Jair Bolsonaro, president of Brazil, is not coming, and Deben said, "Well, that won't be any loss." It doesn't seem to be very impressed with that guy. So, of course, we are going to have to talk about things like tree cover, and can we stop it? Can we stop removing that? Secretary General Guterres said today that some parts of the Amazon rainforest are so badly degraded that they are actually emitting more carbon than they used to absorb. We've been always thinking about biosystems such as rainforests and in Scotland, peatlands, as places where the carbon gets soaked up. If the carbon stays in the peat bogs and if the carbon stays in the forest, that's fine. So obviously these are the big themes that are going to come up on land use, but that's also a Scottish theme. We have our own land use issues, don't we?
Yeah. I mean, it's the companion to the technology, isn't it? It's that we need technology, but we also need to protect our carbon sinks, and that is the oceans, that's the forests, and as you see here in Scotland, things like the peatlands and so forth as well. One of the things I was kind of reading about today, and I can't remember the name because it was like such a but the ocean is a great carbon sink, but actually what's happening with the microplastics is that is interfering with its ability to kind of soak up carbon. So there's a whole host of issues in addition to the destruction of the rainforest. So it's this kind of it's dealing every single angle at this stage as well. Carbon sinks can be very, very successful, but it's still not enough. It needs to be kind of one of a massive issue. My concern here is, and I know I'm kind of sidetracking here, but my concern is that for all the talk that we end up doing nothing. The problem with the Paris Agreement was that it was like, right, okay, we're going to reduce the increase in temperature to 1.5%, and that's going to be okay, but there was no legally binding kind of there was guidance on what countries can do to reduce, but there was no legally binding or internationally binding adjustments there. So basically it allowed everybody to go, oh, it's all right, we'll do it next year, or that country will be fine, or we'll do a bit of this and they can do that. There's no collective thinking there. So there needs to be that kind of, and that's what the point of this one is to kind of reinforce each country's commitment and try and make that a bit stronger. So that's kind of the one thing that we do need, I think, and that's what we need to walk away with at the end of this conference, with very, very, very clear guidelines about what each country can do and what the consequences of not doing that will be. Not just in a kind of vague, the planet's going to die, but there has to be some kind of consequences from the international community.
Right. So I don't know if you heard any interference on sound there at home. If you heard any noise in the background, sounds like a large helicopter just went overhead on our studios.
Ah,
I wonder if that's Marine One just leaving to go and get a pizza for the president. I think it's coming back again. Well, we'll carry on anyway, in spite of that. So yes, so it's forestry tomorrow, and so we'll see. Again, we'll try and find out what happens at that one. We haven't been invited in, so we're going to try and give you an update on what has been discussed and what are the topics. Especially on Broadcasting Scotland, we will be focusing on the areas where the Scottish Government has an input. And in fact, the First Minister and the government will be busy over the next 2 weeks. The First Minister was certainly in the conference hall this morning, and we do actually have Scottish Government input into the stalls, into the pavilions. What they're doing in the blue zone, that is the protected area, just between the Clyde and Finnieston, the area which is screened off. Inside the blue zone, the 30,000 delegates have a chance to walk around the various different pavilions, which are really exhibition spaces. And different countries are putting up displays there showing what they intend to do. So the Scottish Government is involved in a number of those pavilions, and that includes this one, Siobhan, on peat, the peatland, and preserving that kind of landscape. So do you see the Scottish Government as having a kind of influence that's going to go beyond the city of Glasgow? Do you think other delegates from around the world are going to be showing any interest in what Scotland is doing?
I mean, I think Scotland's already garnering an international interest in that respect. I think that it's recognised in Europe, especially that Scotland certainly does punch above its weight in many areas. But actually, I think in terms of climate change as well, that there's innovation there, there's commitment there, as well as kind of putting your money where your mouth is as well. So I think that there is. I think that one of the things that really caught my attention was the youth conference that Nicola Sturgeon and the Scottish Government decided to fund, which is often traditionally funded by the host country, but wasn't. And I think that was an important step, because what that did was show the young people across the globe that Scotland is a place for innovation, for discussion, and for taking the climate crisis seriously. And I think that was a very shrewd move by the Scottish Government, but it also allowed that international reputation amongst the young people, because this is what matters, because the young people are going to inherit this mess. So I think that it's placed Scotland in the minds of young eco-conscious people across the globe. So yes, I think that there is. I think that Scotland's commitment, it's not 100%. Of course it's not. It's never going to be. But I think the commitment is there. I think the innovation is there, and I think that the genuine kind of investment and the kind of process of the just transition and so forth, I think it does throw examples, and good examples, across the globe. The smaller countries can do it, that we're kind of mimicking the Nordic countries in that respect, who have a very, very good reputation for kind of green, clean technology and moving towards a green economy as well. And I think Scotland is more in that ilk rather than the other ilk. So yeah, I think that Scotland should be proud of what we're doing, and we should be blowing that trumpet across Glasgow and across COP26 for the next 2 weeks. A lot of discussion, being part of an independence movement, there's been a lot of discussion about whether the notion of independence should be promoted at COP26. And I'm not necessarily a fan of that. I think that maybe there's a time and place. What we need to show, this is the opportunity, the international community, that as an independent country, we will punch above our weight, and we will take the climate crisis seriously, but the independence needs to be done in order to do that. So it's about making those connections and showing the people that come to COP that Scotland takes this very seriously, despite the kind of the bluster of Boris Johnson as unfortunately our spokesperson.
Yes, the question of independence. Obviously, the COP is not about that, but of course, one of the reasons why the Scottish Green Party is in a kind of coalition deal with the Scottish National Party is because they feel it's not possible to pursue the green agenda unless you actually have the legal authority to go ahead with it. So it's a means to an end as far as they're concerned. But it's interesting, though, on that point, Siobhan, that neither the Scottish government nor the UK government has been, going out of their way to say, on the one hand, this is a British event, Union flags everywhere, and people playing Land of Hope and Glory. There hasn't been any of that. But it's interesting that they started off with the pipes. I was wondering why we began with the small pipes, which is a beautiful instrument, really mellow, but not quite as strident as the big Highland pipes. I wonder if that was a kind of a compromise. You can have pipes as long as it's the small pipes. But they sounded fantastic anyway. So I suppose the point I'm making is that the British government is trying to say, yes, we are in Scotland. We recognise this is Scotland, right? We're not in Croydon, right? But Scotland is part of the UK. So I think there's a kind of a stalemate there. And I think both sides are kind of calling the referendum thing off. Like that's for another day. I think that's what they're both agreeing to.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I was thinking more grassroots, but absolutely, I think you're right. I think there's a bit of a detente there, yeah.
A nice word to finish off with tonight, Siobhan. Let's have a detente. Unfortunately, we haven't got a detente with the atmosphere. It's merciless. So that's thank you for joining us tonight, Siobhan. That's the first of our special programmes covering the COP26. The summit's, of course, right here in Glasgow. So thanks for joining us. And maybe we'll see you later over the next couple of weeks then.
Yeah,
Right.
nice to meet you.
Okay. And all the best. Take care. Stay safe. So I've just finally tonight, I'm going to remind you that, well, thank you for watching anyway. There's a team of volunteers who put together Scotland at 7 and the other programmes. And we now we have more people coming in to do more outside broadcasts, as Dom did today, and he will be doing more later on. So if you want us to do more of these programmes, then we really could do with your help. If you look at the information below, if you want to help us make more programmes, then please donate. If you go on to broadcastingscotland.scot/donate. So everything we get in here is spent on programme making or equipment. So I've been hearing today and yesterday lots of reports from international and UK news outlets saying, well, we're up in Glasgow today, or we're flying up to Scotland tomorrow. Well, we're not up in Glasgow. We are just in Glasgow. We have not flown into Scotland. We were here all along. So if you want Indigenous broadcasting that's made right here in Scotland by people in Scotland for Scotland, then please give us a hand. Right? So I'm Hugh Stewart. That was Scotland at 7 on Monday, the 1st of November. We'll see you later. Good night.